Hearts rumbling, won't fumble it, raise it high. High time is right now, so let's shine. We go hard, one heart, one mind. This win is ours for the taking, baby, it's showtime.
Hello there, I'm Thunder Dan, and I'm joined tonight by Joe Nicely, and we're here for the RotoBaller NFL DFS Roundtable. We're one guy short tonight, but the two of us are going to bang through this Week 3 slate. Joe, how you doing, man?
Doing good, Dan. Always good to be with you, man, and excited to dive into Week 3.
No doubt. I mean, the first couple of weeks have been pretty crazy, a lot of unexpected stuff. Last week, we'll touch on some things we got right and some things we didn't. But our goal here every week is to help you try to start building those lineups for Week 3. Real quick, though, I wanted to talk about golf a little bit because I saw today that you were recognized by Daily Overlay for being one of the most accurate PGA rankers and analysts this season. That's pretty cool, man. Congratulations.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that, Dan. It was really cool, kind of a surprise. I didn't even know that was going on. Didn't know they were tracking my picks. But, yeah, really cool. Some names that I really respect up on that list. So very fortunate to be lumped in with those guys, and looking forward to the Ryder Cup this week. And then we got the swing season kicking back up next week. So I hope you'll go to RotoBaller.com, check out our PGA premium content. You can use my promo code NICE and get a discount on that. It's the best deal of the year. Prices always go up in January. So definitely encourage anybody that wants to get into PGA to come check us out.
No doubt, man. I love the swing season. I was just thinking the other day about how it's kind of perfect timing with PGA because you have your tournament Thursday through Sunday. You kind of have that lull in the middle of the week, and like you're starting to make NFL lineups and look at stuff, and you got golf going on, and then it kind of helps fill in that middle of the week when they're just between football games too.
Yeah, it's always a really fun time of the year, man. And then when you throw college football into the mix, I'm in Knoxville down in the South, so obviously we're all about our college football. So really makes it fun, man. When you got NFL lineups going, PGA lineups going, you cheered your team on Saturday, makes for some great weekends in the fall.
No doubt. Yeah, it's that time of year. All right, well, that's a great way to get into a plug here for PGA Premium and NFL Premium too. If you haven't already subscribed, I mean, we have some great premium products here at RotoBaller. I would highly encourage you to check out Joe and his team's content for PGA. I think our NFL team is one of the best, and I keep saying this every week that I think our premium content is underpriced, right? As far as the value that it provides to the people on a weekly basis. So check us out. Thunder Dan is my promo code. Joe mentioned his is nice. Get in there. If you're not already a member, join our premium Slack where we're chatting with some of our subscribers and members on a nightly basis about everything. Baseball going on still. And like you said, it's kind of a great time of year. We got baseball. We got playoffs coming up. We're a month away from NBA and NHL. And it's just honestly, my favorite time of year of sports. It's awesome. So check us out. Let's start off here, Joe. We kind of did this last week and kind of take a little look back and say, what were we on top of and what weren't we in terms of what we had right and wrong? I don't know how you did overall. I did okay. I still have 2 okay weeks so far this year. Nothing big yet. Where do you think we got it right or wrong to start?
Yeah, man. Not a good week for me in Week 2, Dan, if we're being honest and transparent, which we always try to do. Mm-hmm. But I really love that we're doing this at the top of each show now. I think kind of self-evaluation is a really important part of being a good DFS player. And I think you have to be willing to examine what you're doing, the decisions you made in the past week. And I made some, I don't want to say bad. I don't want to say I made some bad decisions as far as play. The plays were really solid. A big miss was, we talked about on here, the Cowboys Chargers game. Was heavily invested in that one. And I think in a vacuum, it was a really good spot. I love the volume, love the projected game environment, loved a lot of things about it. So I'm not really disappointed with the plays, but I am a little bit disappointed with my thought process. As far as, we're all trying to figure out what we want to do in DFS. Some folks just want to throw a couple lineups in on Sunday morning and enjoy the day and hope to get lucky, and that's totally fine. Some guys want to grind cash and try to eke out a little profit there, and that's totally fine. And some people, such as myself, you're kind of searching for that big score. You're looking for upside. You're looking to take down a GPP. I'm less concerned with cashing than I used to be, and more looking for upside. And I feel like I kind of got a little bit of tunnel vision on that game, which probably wasn't the best direction to take when trying to win a GPP,
Sure.
Because those guys were so chalky in that game. So overall, just disappointed kind of with my mindset and how to attack last week's slate. I think from a cash perspective, that was a really great game to target, but maybe not from a GPP perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I ended up kind of having pieces in cash like Lamb and who did okay, and Allen who did all right, and I survived because I wasn't too overweight on all those guys, and survived in cash. But my GPP lineups were not great, and it sucks because I had a ton of Brady lineups, and the Bucks went off, and Ridley as a run back was good, but like I just didn't have the right pieces around him. Kind of slept on Derrick Henry, which was we'll talk about him a little later, like a mistake. Obviously, like we know what he can do any given week, um, and just didn't have the right pieces around it. So I agree. We kind of got locked in, and you can do that, especially as an analyst. You break down these numbers and you study these things all week, and you're like, here, these are my spots. Like you have to play your spots, right? You got to trust your gut, and your gut was saying like, this total isn't lying. These defenses are bad. Like this is going to be high scoring, and you got to sink or swim with that, right? You can't play everybody. You can't play all those spots.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I think it's something you touched on specifically, kind of us as analysts and writers. We want to give our readers and our listeners the best information possible.
Right.
And a lot of times when you dive into the stats and you feel confident in passing that information along to your readers because you do feel like it's a good spot. And maybe you want to limit your risk a little bit because you don't want to miss. You don't want to give out some bad info to somebody that's reading your articles or listening to your podcast or whatever. So it's a trap you can kind of fall into. I feel that I've done really well avoiding that over the years, but it's going to happen, especially when a spot pops up like that, that Dallas Chargers game last week.
And the reality is we have a couple more spots like that this week, and it's going to be we're going to have to like pick and choose your battles here because one of these games this week's going to go off, and there's a couple of them that definitely could. But I totally agree, and we don't have to belabor this point, but like it's tough because you do the content, you write these people up, or you suggest these players. You can't not play them then come Sunday and go, oh, hey, come Sunday, I totally changed my mind. Then I played all these other guys that I didn't recommend to you. And I would never do that. So it is a bit of a tough spot. So we kind of whiffed on the Dallas game, maybe underestimated a couple other spots that did go off. But let's move on, right? That's the kind of that's my favorite thing about DFS. The reason that I play mainly DFS and do sports betting and not play a lot of season long and other things sports. It's just the fact that you can start fresh in a daily sport every day and a weekly sport every week. So we get a clean slate this week. I will say I think pricing is finally starting to tighten up a little bit on both sites. It's going to make it a little more challenging. Would you agree there?
Yeah, for sure. And we talked about that a lot in week one when the pricing was so soft. There were some spots we wanted to take advantage of because they weren't going to last forever. And as you mentioned, we're starting to see that in week 3. Some big changes with things tightening up, pricing increases for players that are putting up big numbers, and some price drops for guys that we might talk about as the show goes on. But it's really interesting. It kind of tightens up, and it's going to continue to do that throughout the season, Dan, as you well know. So
by the end of the year, man, it's tough.
Yeah. As you mentioned, man, it's just so much fun, man. Love NFL DFS because, like you said, it's a new challenge every week, completely different slate every week.
New puzzle.
So really excited to get into this one, man.
No. All right. Well, let's jump right into it. We usually start off with our kind of studs segment here, and like who are some of the studs that we're targeting, high priced guys that you want to anchor your cash game lineups in. With and also guys that you want to have exposure to in GPPs. You're stacking them up, or you're playing them as one-offs because they have such elite floors and ceilings. I'll throw it to you first here, and this is tough because there's a couple up here this week. But who's that guy for you this week? Who's at least maybe 8K or above on DraftKings, or I guess in that 8 to 9K range on FanDuel this week.
Yeah, if you're looking at a guy that can kind of bring a nice floor and ceiling into the mix, and this one we're doing this on Wednesday, so this one's kind of going to depend on health, a little bit of an ankle issue, but my eyes go to Dalvin Cook.
Yep, same.
They're up at the top of the running back board, 8.4K. Yeah, on DraftKings. Just love the spot, man. We know what Derrick Henry did to this Seattle team last week, and Jonathan Taylor actually had a really nice game against Seattle in week 1. We know the volume's there for Dalvin, 42 carries and 10 targets over the first 2 games. So the usage is going to be there. We know the talent's there, and I love the matchup. So there's just a lot to like there with Dalvin. Like I said, depending on how the ankle is looking towards the end of the week.
Yeah, I second that, and I feel like I've been a broken record on Dalvin all season. I have him as a core play again this week. I just think it's even more justified this week than perhaps it was the first 2 weeks with this elite game environment, right? 56-point total. He's getting a ton of touches. I think something like 88% of the touches on running back touches. Whatever number you want to throw out there, he's been the workhorse. He didn't score last week, but he had just an awesome game. I think he averaged like 6 yards a carry, and I mean, he's a stud. We know it's
yeah. I mean, he's been relatively quiet, really, Dan, when we look at it. But you look at his totals; he put up 21.4 DraftKings points in week 1 and 19.8 last week. So those feel like floor games, really, to me.
Right.
Yeah. So just a lot to love there, man. Totally agree.
Yeah, and then in DraftKings in general, he's 84. Like they're a little softer pricing on and he's 9,500 on FanDuel, so it's tough. But there's some other guys that are a little cheaper on FanDuel that help you fit him in. But 8,400 on DraftKings with PPR and his receiving, like just no brainer for me. You play Dalvin Cook in cash and you move on. I'll toss out my second guy there just because you already said Cook, but the other guy I'm really high on is Austin Eckler this week. And he's at 7,200 DraftKings, 7,000 only on FanDuel. I know FanDuel sometimes it's tough to play him because you worry about the half-point PPR, or if he doesn't get a touchdown, you're worried if he's not hitting his ceiling. But man, I mean, Kansas City to me has shown that they are beatable on the ground, and this looks like a really good matchup for him. If they pound the ball and he gets a bunch of carries, good. If they get behind and are trailing and need to throw and Herbert's dumping it off, like good. I feel like he's pretty game script independent too, and then that's another one of these games that we really avoid. 55.5, right? It's right up there. It's neck and neck with that Seattle game.
Yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think about Eckler?
Yeah. Hashtag spoiler alert, Dan. He's going to be in my article Friday morning. I actually wrote him up today, so I love that. Kansas City has been bad against the run, giving up 5.65 yards per carry. That's the worst in the NFL through 2 weeks. And Eckler maybe hadn't had the workload we hoped for, but as you mentioned, he's kind of not dependent on game script. He can do it through the air. I think had 0 targets in week 1 and had 9 last week. So this is a guy that can get you kind of any way you choose, and love that game environment as a whole. So yeah, man, I'm on board. Great call with Austin Eckler.
Love it. Yeah, he had 9 catches, 9 targets last week, and they had a fluky 0 week 1. So like, he's only averaging 4.5 catches a game, but like that like more likely he's going to have 5, 6. Like they've really featured him out of the backfield, and I feel like he's a pretty safe play there for cash formats. And of course, that's a game you can stack up. We can get back to that later. All right, so those are our high price guys. We're talking about backs. We'll probably get to some receivers later. What about some value guys? This is where I think it's tough, especially in cash, because a lot of these guys, when you look down here, aren't super safe. It's hard to find a safe-ish type play for cash.
Yeah.
Who are you looking at?
Yeah, as we get into week 3, we're starting to see some of these injuries pop up, Dan. Kind of that we're used to seeing as the season progresses. So one I'm going to really be keeping an eye on is Daryl Henderson with the Rams. Sony Michel would immediately pop into play for me in cash if Henderson is out. He looked good in New England last year, came in last week in relief of Henderson and looked really good. 4.6 yards per carry last week in that matchup. So I think, he's a salary saver, sub 5K price tag. and a really good offense. The matchup isn't great, but I think it's a, take the savings and run kind of spot if he's going to have that backfield to himself if Henderson happens to be out.
It's one of those deals where that happens later in the week and everyone's going to move on to that play. It happened with Mostert week 1 and then he burned us all, but that was such a fluky injury thing. I don't see how, Sonny Michel, if he's going to be the main back for the Rams, totally bust here. I know it's a perceived tough matchup, but let's be honest, like Tampa Bay's defense has not looked great.
Yeah.
I mean, they have yielded. Like last week, Atlanta moved the ball on them. When I do my line matchup ratings here, like they actually have one of the worst ratings here as far as D-line versus the Rams O-line. So, I mean, it's one of those things where people may stay away because it's that perceived tough matchup, but, the volume and perhaps some goal line carries there, like at his price, I don't even know what he costs because I haven't gone there. My brain hasn't gone to the what if Daryl.
Yeah, he's 4,900, 49 on DraftKings.
Yeah, you're gonna almost be like an auto play there for your third back or utility slot or whatever. So, yeah, I'm with you there. One guy who, and I want to get your opinion on him here is he's the third receiver for Minnesota, and honestly, it's KJ Osborne. Right, I'm just wondering if we're chasing here.
I'm not making this up, Dan. I had KJ Osborne below Sonny Michel on my list, so we're in lockstep here on this one, man.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. We usually are. I mean, I know maybe he won't do what he did the first 2 weeks, but even if he does 60 or 70%, if he at his price, if he gives you 5 or 6 catches for 50 or 60 yards, boom, with full PPR, you have 10 points as a punt, like. I don't know how you get away from him in that game environment either, especially if you think Minnesota's going to be thrown or if it's just going to go back and forth. Like, to me, that's the closest thing to a free square you got, unless we get the Sony free play. Yeah,
the price tags just kind of makes you scratch your head, right? 3.5K after a really strong week, and he's got 15. It wasn't a fluky week 2 performance. He's got 15 targets through the first 2 games, and has really solidified himself as a third receiver in a good offense. So yeah, man, I'm in total agreement with you on KJ Osborne. Lock him in cash and move on to your next play.
All right, man. This is so easy today. There's no argument. We're just like, let's agree on everything. No, that's good though. I think maybe that's a good sign. Like we're on the right spots. All right, so let's shift from him over to. I have this circled, and this is a really big debate, not only in the DFS community, but I just saw Scott Engel put out an article, and he even featured in here like the fact that Kev and our buddy Frank argue constantly about what should we do with CEH, right? With Edwards-Helaire, should we buy him, sell him? I don't really care about any of that because I don't really play a lot of season long. But this week he's 4,800 on DraftKings, right? And I just keep thinking like, is he going to end up chalk, or are people going to be afraid to play him? But like either one of the 2 things is going to happen. He's really chalky, and I want to fade him, or people will just totally sleep on him when he goes off. I don't know. What is your take on the whole CEH situation?
Yeah, I saw that article from Scott. Really, really fun, man. I love when Kev gets going and Frank gets going. I love all those guys and their takes, man. Yeah, I've never really been on the CEH bandwagon, not to the extent that most people have. And the simple reason for me, Dan, is I think that a running back in this offense with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback, when you got Tyreek Hill, you got Travis Kelce, I just think you're kind of rolling with a limited ceiling, man. Obviously, you're going to have some spot games because this is such a high-powered offense, but from week to week, your ceiling's kind of limited. I mean, this offense is going to go through Patrick Mahomes. So it's not a huge surprise to me that we've seen some of these down games from Edwards-Helaire. So I've not been a huge fan. Not rostered him a ton in DFS. As for this week specifically, you kind of mentioned it. I'll kind of let ownership dictate what I do with him. I'll get a little bit clearer picture on that as the week goes on, see where his ownership is. It looks like he's going to be extremely popular. Won't hesitate a bit to just completely fade him. If he's going under on, I'll jump on board. This is a decent matchup if we're looking at this game in a vacuum. The Chargers are kind of struggled against the run. They're 31st in the league in yards allowed per carry. I think allowing just over 5.5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. So if there is a breakout spot, this could be a good one. So I'll keep my eyes open on that one as the week goes on. Have you got a strong thought on what you're doing with him?
Very torn, and like you said, I'd like to know. I mean, it's Wednesday, so we don't know where everybody's going to be on this, and what other places are going to tout, and then by Saturday, Sunday, what the general consensus, the group think is that you need to play him or whatnot. I'm with you though. I've never been a big fan of this guy. I've never really seen how people are enamored with him. I don't think he's a bad back by any means. I just don't think he's anything special. He hasn't done much he's been getting plenty of carries. I think it's like 27 carries, only 80 yards. Like, he's not been dynamic with the ball in his hands. They have other guys, right? They have Williams and they have McKinnon, who they can bring out of the backfield on passing downs. Like, it's not, to me, it doesn't scream must play. I think if he ends up being a trendy play, I'll just fade and play Travis Kelce and the guys who are gonna score. And if he ends up totally kind of, maybe the buzz dies down and people forget about him, then maybe you play him. I'm still making up my mind about him. But I'm with you though. I'm not, and I've never been this big CEH fan. So I'm kind of leaning towards the fade now.
Yeah, if he's pulling any kind of ownership at all, I definitely will be out. He's not a guy I'm on a roster when he's carrying any kind of ownership. Like I said, he's a play that I might let ownership dictate. If he's going under-owned, I might try to hop in there and pop him in a few GPPs, but he's a guy that's never going to be in my roster as chalk.
Yeah, to me, he's probably just likely going to stick out as like an optimizer guy, like one of those guys where the optos are going to spit him out because price versus projection versus. I just don't. If he's that guy, I'll pass. So let's just move right into another guy. And this guy wasn't in our pre-show notes, but he kind of just popped onto the scene today. It's Justin Fields, who has been announced as the starter now this week, and I don't know. Already I'm kind of seeing buzz around him. Like, yeah, just plug him into cash. He's cheap. He can run. And I'm just thinking to myself, boy, he did not look good last week. I don't know how comfortable I would feel just throwing him in the cash just because he can scramble and run around a little bit. I don't know. Do you have a strong take on Fields?
As you mentioned, it's kind of news we are just taking in today. But I think this might be our first disagreement of the week, Dan. I do like Fields in cash. At 5,200, would be very comfortable going there with him. But because of what it opens up throughout the rest of your roster, and as you mentioned, because of that floor that his rushing ability brings, had 10 rushing attempts last week, kind of in limited action. Didn't look great. I was watching Red Zone mostly last week, so I didn't get to sit and just strictly watch that game. But
some highlights.
Looked a little fluttery. Looked a little fluttery coming in there. Maybe a little out of sorts. And it's an odd situation anytime a starting quarterback goes down with an injury. I imagine especially for a rookie stepping in there. But here, it's Wednesday. He's going to have several days to prepare. He did look very good in the preseason. Not a dream spot going up to Cleveland to play the Browns, but certainly one that's winnable. We saw Tyrod Taylor playing extremely well last week before he left the game with an injury. So I do fall down on the side of Justin Fields in this one. I would look to roster him in cash games.
All right. Well, we're allowed to disagree once in a while. We don't have to be on the same page every time. I have my guys too. Like I have a strong. And we'll jump right into these two because they're the perfect pivot here. For like 600 more though, I can get up to Teddy B, who did me right last time and is like completing 78% of his passes, and like maybe it's a boring low total game against the Jets, but it's the Jets. Like I just feel like there's a floor there. And then of course, this is the guy that's getting a lot of buzz is Daniel Jones, who people love to make fun of and whatever else, but this guy's running for 150 yards and 2 scores and playing Atlanta. So I don't know. For 600 more, I feel pretty good with those two. If you had to pick one, though, are you siding with Teddy B or gun to your head, Teddy B or Daniel Jones?
I think they're both fine. Not over the moon for either, honestly, but I think they are both solid salary savers. With this Fields news, I personally would just bump on down to him. But I think if you're picking one, I'd lean a little bit Daniel Jones. you mentioned Teddy with that high completion percentage, but man, his fantasy scoring is so dependent on him being just absolutely hyper efficient.
True.
He's going to pick up very very little on the ground. This Denver offense isn't going to throw the ball a ton. You don't think, especially in this matchup against the Jets, they're not going to be forced to.
No.
So you're just depending on hyper efficiency from Bridgewater to put any kind of usable score up. Whereas you mentioned the floor with Daniel Jones, thanks to his running ability, 15 carries for 122 yards and 2 TDs over the first 2 games of the season. And this offense at times can be explosive. We've seen Darius Slayton emerge as a downfield threat. Sterling Shepard's been extremely solid, so I feel like he's got good weapons there. So if I'm choosing between those two, slightly leaning to Daniel Jones.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way. I ran a poll on Twitter today, and I actually hadn't checked it until now just to see where it ended up. I'll take a peek here in a second, but I think it was something like 55-45. Maybe it ended up 60-40 for Jones. I think Teddy's been good. I think you're right about he has to be hyper efficient, and he has to throw 2 scores. If for some reason Denver ends up running the ball in a couple times and he doesn't get those 2 touchdowns, you probably don't get there, and that's. Maybe I'm going back to the well one too many times here on Teddy, but I do like it.
And when we're talking about DraftKings specifically, something I kind of always like to keep in mind on there is that 300-yard bonus for quarterbacks is a pretty big deal over on DraftKings. So not only does he have to throw for a couple scores, be really efficient in the volume that he gets, but it's he kind of was whether he's getting to that 300-yard passing mark, which is kind of key over on DraftKings.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I was watching his box score last week. He only got to that 300 mark, I think, on like one of the last drives in the fourth quarter. It was close. He threw for like 320, and it was like he was hovering around 270, 280 until the last half of the fourth quarter. So you're right. There's not a lot of margin for error there. Daniel Jones, that game has another, I think, 4, 5, 6 points projected total in that. We know Atlanta will score a little bit, and that game definitely could pop off. The Jets game has one of the lowest totals on the slate. It doesn't make a ton of sense, I admit, to take your quarterback from one of the lower totals. But I'm a fan of Teddy Two Gloves, man. Like I think the Denver's sneaky, man. They're 2-0.
Yeah, I think I like him more
in real life.
From a real life perspective than as especially a DFS play.
Yeah.
I just have concerns about the upside there from a DFS perspective.
All right, no doubt. All right, so I have a couple more guys circled here. Speaking of that game, the Atlanta-New York game, and we've been debating this in Slack this week too, is like Mike Davis and Cordarrelle Patterson, both cheap, 5,100 on DK and 48 or 46 for Cordarrelle. And do you trust either of them or neither of them, or do you have a preference on one of these guys, or are you just staying away from that messy kind of timeshare?
I love Cordarrelle Patterson, man. He's a Tennessee Volunteer, so got a soft spot for him for sure. But yeah, man, it's a spot I just have to dodge completely. It's one of those things to me. If a team's got 2 running backs, they don't really have one. At least for me, from a DFS perspective, I think both guys are capable. If we knew we were going to see one guy or the other, sure, we could maybe take a look there. But I think Davis had 64% of the snaps last week. Patterson got up to 33% of the snaps. So we're trending closer to a 50-50 split. The total opportunities were fairly even there. So I think it's an either-or spot where either of these guys could do a little bit of damage, but yeah. I don't know that anybody's going to give us a tournament-winning top score.
I hear you. I think my take would be this. I don't trust either of them in cash because we don't have a real solid floor for them. It's not like a real elite spot. Like New York's defense isn't terrible against the run game. To me, if I took any shots, it'd be on Cordarrelle just because he does have some explosive kind of playmaking. Mike Davis just doesn't. There was a time when Mike Davis was, filling in for McCaffrey that we could play him because we knew he was going to get 20 touches, and that's fine. Yeah. But he's not taking 50 yards of the house. He's not catching it in the flat and going 30 yards or whatever. Like Patterson had only like 10 or 12 touches and then turned into 2 scores last week. Like if you play him, I think you take some shots in tournaments because he can take a reverse or a sweep or something and make a big play. Or I don't even know. Is he still returning kicks? Like he might be returning kicks yet too.
I'm not sure. Not sure on that one.
Right?
He should be. If he's not, Atlanta should have him out there.
He's an athlete. He's a stud. Like get him the ball. And Atlanta's deep offense is just kind of not great. I think they're just trying to get their best players the ball, which makes some sense. So I agree with you. I was kind of hoping you would say, yeah, I really like Cordarrelle, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'll just keep him for a couple, GPP lineups. I don't think we can trust either of them. You're right. All right. Next thing I've circled here is another kind of either or. Right. This is kind of fun going back and forth. So you got to pick one. Two guys who I know probably everybody's going to be high on this week. Cooper Kupp and Tyler Lockett. If you can only play one, because it is tough to get them both in, even on DraftKings at like 68 and 74, unless you're going to punt a bunch of other spots. Like, let's just say you have to pick one for your lineup. Who has a more legit shot this week of keeping those 20-plus DraftKings games going, and which guy has a more legit chance of dudding this week? This is a tough one.
Yeah, it is tough, man. I actually like both guys. I would feel comfortable rostering both or either. So I don't know that I kind of predicting either one to drop significantly. But if I'm picking one of the two who's more likely to kind of break out, I'm going Tyler Lockett. Just because we've seen it happen in the past, for lengthy stretches in the past, we've seen Lockett kind of disappear in this offense. And it's not a very different group of players on that side of the ball. So, I feel like it's possible that we see, Lockett come and go a little bit. Whereas Kupp, I feel like, he's had 21 targets through 2 games. This passing offense is really clicking. Matt Stafford's obviously very comfortable with him. And I absolutely love Cooper Kupp's matchup this week, man. Tampa Bay is just routinely being thrashed by the slot, even dating back to last year. I can remember writing some articles up targeting slot guys against Tampa. And Sean Murphy-Bunting is one of the worst slot corners in the NFL. Well, he's out. And his backup is playing. So if this guy Ross Cockrell is getting the start for Tampa Bay, if he's backing up Sean Murphy-Bunting, I definitely want to circle this guy and target him, especially with the guy that's going like Cooper Kupp right now.
I hear you, and the fact is he's cheaper. He's only $100 cheaper on FanDuel, but he is, $600 cheaper. They didn't bump his price like they should have. They bumped it 800, but they probably could have done more.
You think he'll be a little popular, Dan?
I think it's very popular. I feel like it's one of those things you probably have to play him in cash to match ownership. Here's the thing, like he's not just like your typical slot guy that gets a bunch of dink and dunks. Like he's really involved. He runs downfield routes, and he gets a ton of red zone targets too. Like he's going to score. Yeah. He's got 3 touchdowns in 2 games. That's something he did last year, before Stafford got there. Was he scores? He's a heady, good player, runs good routes. I don't know how you get away from Cooper Kupp in that matchup. I will try to find a way to play them both. I will tell you right now because I think Lockett's got an excellent matchup. We could see Metcalf with the tougher matchup out there at corner this week, which could funnel more work to Lockett. But here's the thing: Lockett is getting huge chunk plays, right? And you're right; he doesn't have that perhaps predictable floor in terms of getting more targets and more. Kind of a safer play. So I don't know. I kind of side with you, but I do wish we could find a way to play them both. I think it's always fun.
Yeah, it's one of those things, man. I mean, you might almost want to go Kupp in cash and maybe look at Lockett in GPPs. Yeah. Kind of a lot of times what we see with these Seattle guys, we see them kind of eat into each other's ownership. A lot of people will think it's a DK Metcalf week. So you'll see that DK Metcalf's ownership go up and Tyler Lockett's go down a little bit. So that's another thing as we get on into the week. I'll keep an eye on the ownership projections for those guys.
Yeah, I want to check out our cornerback matchup column. It usually comes out, I think tomorrow, and from Andrew, who does a great job with that, and see where he's got, who he has lined up against Lockett in the slot, and see, how that looks too. And there's a lot of things here. I mean, maybe it's a Metcalf week, maybe it's not, but Lockett just seems to be, Russ Wilson has that. He's like that safety net, right? He's the guy who has the most experience with. He knows where to find him. They have a real, I don't want to say Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison thing here. I can get you going, but I do
Yeah,
think
a lot of people predicted a Metcalf week last week, right? You know, Lockett had a huge week 1, and then a lot of people were kind of projecting a dip and a Metcalf bump last week. But we saw Lockett just hang right in there, man. Posted another really nice number.
Yep.
So you know, maybe it's almost contrarian to think, hey, let's stick with Tyler Lockett here instead of betting on a DK Metcalf week.
That's the thing about NFL. To me, it's like such a long week, and you start out in the beginning of the week, you're like, all right, Tyler Lockett. And then middle of the week, everyone's like, well, maybe it's Metcalf week. And then by the end of the week, maybe they're like, well, they're back to it. You have too much time to think about this stuff. You circle back around a couple times.
Right.
I like
and at the end of the day, you're there Sunday morning still trying to figure things out.
Like, what do I do? I will have Tyler Lockett in lineups regardless of what happens the next 3 or 4 days here. I promise you that. All right.
Yeah.
I want to go to tight end. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about tight ends on the show the last couple weeks, but I feel like it's a strong position, especially this week. We haven't had Kelsey on all the main slates. We didn't have Waller at the same time. I think it's the first slate we have Kelsey and Waller on at the same time. We got Gronk, who's having a heck of a start to the year. I got these guys circled here. I got Kyle Pitts as a potential breakout. I got T.J. Hawkinson having a career year start to his year, and then even like Noah Fant, who's having a heck of a start for Denver. So, talk to me about your favorite, just high-priced tight end, mid-priced tight end. What do you think about? Do you spend up on? I would call those two guys, Waller and Kelsey, your elite options. Do you spend up on one of them, or are you happy dropping down into that mid tier with some of those guys I mentioned, Gronk and Hawkinson?
Sure, man. I think a lot of it boils down to kind of your roster construction throughout the rest of building your lineups. You mentioned tight ends pretty strong this week, and really throughout the year, it's been fairly strong. Whereas last year it was absolutely horrible, man. I even got towards the end of last year, kind of instituted a little rule for myself, just called the Kelsey rule. And the Kelsey rule is pretty simple. If he's playing on the main slate, you just play him and forget about it. So I think that's certainly something you can do this week. And if I am paying up over those mid-priced options that you mentioned, I will just go all the way up to Kelsey. I don't think you can ever go wrong locking him in, with the only downside being obviously the price tag. But of those mid-tier guys, I think you can certainly go down there. T.J. Hawkinson, this Detroit Lions receiving core is so weak that he's basically the top option for Jared Goff in this offense right now. We've seen Baltimore kind of get trashed by tight ends, but you also have to take into account the two guys they've played, Travis Kelce and Darren Waller. So, we can always kind of take that into account when considering their numbers against tight ends. But Hawkinson's a solid play. Really content to stick with Kyle Pitts. I've kind of been there both weeks this year so far. He was huge chalk in week 1. We saw that ownership drastically go down in week 2. I think it's going to kind of settle somewhere in the middle this week. But I've been happy with his usage. Really hadn't put those final numbers up yet, but been targeted 14 times through 2 weeks. Pretty solid ADOT, a little bit over 7 for a tight end. That's the best of that mid-price group from an ADOT perspective. And the Giants haven't been great against the tight end. Yeah, they're the fourth most DraftKings points against the tight end position this year. So I'm comfortable going with Pitts if I'm not paying up for Kelsey.
You're looking at my notes here. I have it in the cheat sheet this week about Pitts and the match. I mean, that's the thing. Like, you can't just quit going back to Pitts just after one bad week and then last week was mediocre. I don't know. Okay, like the spot is great. I mean, Russell Gage looks like he might be questionable, right? I mean,
yeah.
If they're down Gage and he's only going to get more comfortable as a professional and more comfortable with Ryan. Like, I think he's a guy that you should get out in front of, especially because the one thing the week 1 bust did was, like, it got rid of a lot of those people who were going to, it kept it from being chalk, right, the last week or 2. So I like Pitts a lot. I like Hawkinson. Here's the thing about Baltimore. I know they've played those 2 guys, but like I feel like their defense really kind of funnels targets to like the middle of the field and the tight end because they have good cornerbacks. You don't really want to throw deep on them. So I feel like with Jared Goff, he's like, Captain Check. He's kind of like Captain Check Down and Mr. Play Action. Like, he wants to throw short and intermediate stuff. So that's perfect. Hey, dump it off to the backs and dump it off to the tight end a bunch and let them rack up those catches. I'm with you. I like Kelsey over Waller, and I like probably it's tough. Maybe give a slight edge to Pitts for upside in ownership over Hawkinson, but I think Hawkinson's kind of safer for cash if you really want to go after his target floor. Like what, 8 catches a game, 10 targets a game so far.
Yeah.
Like that's legit.
Yeah, really, really good volume play there. I like Hawkinson from a volume perspective. Good call on that, Dan.
Awesome. All right, well, we're going to move into the final kind of segment here. We're going to be more GPP focused, which is perfect for you, and honestly for me too. I do play cash every week, but setting my cash lineup gives me anxiety as I'm trying to figure out who else is going to play and match the chalk. I can sit here and build GPP lineups all night. I love to play, how many different variations of different stacks can we make and who we want to back with. So let's talk about GPP for a minute. Someone that we maybe didn't hit on who is flying under the radar. Let's leave it open to any price, high price, low price, but just a pivot or someone who you think might go low owned or overlooked this week in tournaments.
We're guessing as to ownership, but the guy that sticks out to me, and as I mentioned, kind of at the top of the show, Dan, I want to tag GPPs with a side only mindset. That's how I want to approach those. And a guy that really popped out to me this week is Saquon Barkley at the running back spot. A lot of concerns with him coming into the year. The Giants have elected to kind of move him in slowly. We saw him play 48% of the snaps in week 1, but that number shot way up in week 2, down up to 84% of the offensive snaps in week 2 against Washington. His total opportunity count went from 13 to 16. We saw him break off a really nice 40-plus yard run against Washington last week. And at a 6.5K price tag, we saw him open the year at 7.8. And really nothing surprising's happened. We pretty much knew that this New York organization was going to kind of ease him in. But his DFS price has tumbled. So I'm real willing to buy low in this spot. With kind of the knowledge that, it might be one of those games where Saquon just gets 10 or 12 touches, puts up a so-so score. But I also want to go in knowing that Saquon Barkley, this kind of the Saquon Barkley that we know, is very capable of posting a GPP winning type of score in this matchup against Atlanta.
See, I have anxiety about the whole Barkley situation because it reminds me of the CHE thing where it's like everyone's saying, hey, look how cheap he is. Look at the opportunity. We know how – and obviously I think Barkley is an elite back. I'm a huge Penn State fan. I watched him play. I mean, I know he's a stud, and I watched his rookie season. He was incredible. I don't really doubt that he's a good back. Like I kind of have reservations about CEH, but I do have a little bit of reservation about the injury and the workload. And I know he's slowly ramping up here. And is it a real elite matchup? I mean, I know the Atlanta secondary is not great. I don't think they're terrible. In fact, there was an article today on RotoBaller from Dan Fornick who was talking about just the Giants O-line grading out really poorly through 2 weeks. So there's some red flags there. I do agree with you that, hey, 6K on FanDuel and what's his price on DraftKings?
6.5 on DraftKings.
6.5, of course, those are way too low for a guy his talent.
It's going to kind of depend on ownership for me too, Dan.
Right.
I'm kind of hoping he's going to go under the radar a little bit, but with that price tag, I look for him to get some run kind of around the DFS industry as we go through the week. So, his ownership might get up there where it's not smart to play him, but I'm just so interested. You mentioned the word anxiety, and that's maybe not always a bad thing when building GPP lineups. Maybe we have to be willing to embrace a little bit of volatility, and the concerns are very real. All the concerns that you mentioned, the workload, the injury, maybe not the greatest matchup. They're all valid concerns, but at the end of the day, you start narrowing these guys down and trying to zero in on players that can post the type of score needed to take down a tournament, and Barkley's a guy that you have to circle there.
For sure. My anxiety was really I was talking about if I have like FOMO, like I don't want to miss out on the big Barkley game week to
Yeah.
week when the reins are off and he has a huge game. But at the same time, I don't want to. If everyone's chasing it, I don't want to chase it too.
Yeah.
So I think I will put them in the same category. Kind of wait and see with how ownership shakes out. Um, I'm going to touch on. Let's see. I have so many guys circled here because I finished on my main research today, and I have a bunch of guys I wanted to get to. I guess we can get to some of them on our stacks, but I will throw out there, and I don't know how you feel about the whole Baltimore situation. I think Baltimore has an incredible matchup against Detroit this week, and I don't really hear anybody talking about the Ravens. Detroit's been god awful on defense. The Green Bay did whatever they wanted to Monday night. Week one, the Niners ran all over them, and I think the kind of running back by committee thing is going to scare people off using any of their backs. But Tyson Williams is a guy I had circled. If he, continues to get the bulk of the carries there, and he's pretty affordable, 5,800 on DraftKings, 6,400 on FanDuel, and maybe I'm just kind of using the whole team here. Maybe like Lamar Jackson and Hollywood Brown as a stack even. Like I just feel like Baltimore in general is in a great spot. You could run it back with Hawkinson if you wanted to, and I wonder if they just kind of get overlooked because we have 4 or 5 games with higher totals and with maybe some sexier plays. Do you have any interest in Baltimore, or are you just going to try to stay away from that mess?
Yeah, I might veer away from the backfield a little bit there, but I'm very interested in Lamar. I think we saw Sunday night in that game against the Chiefs, we kind of saw the signature Lamar that we came to see a lot. Maybe it disappeared at times last year, but this offense is going to run through him. So anytime it's a week where I'm looking at the Ravens, it kind of starts and ends with Lamar for me. But I'm certainly interested in him in this matchup. Obviously, the best rushing floor of any quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah.
Look good throwing the ball. So certainly interested in him. Let me throw a name at you, Dan, since we're talking GPPs in Baltimore, a guy that has been on a milk carton. What about Mark Andrews? We're looking for maybe a little pivot, some chalky tight ends.
That's a good one.
Andrews hadn't been heard from. I think that's a really unique way that you could attack that game and maybe pair him with Lamar.
5K on D. I mean, that's not going to see you. I don't remember seeing him at 5K much at all last year.
This is a guy that last year we were seeing up there near Kelsey-like numbers, if I remember correctly, up near, certainly Waller type pricing, up near the tight end, top of the tight end slot every single week. So, a couple quiet games, that's for sure. But, this is a great spot in GPPs, to jump on a guy that can post monster outings like Andrews can.
I do agree. I mean, you're buying real low on a 5K price tag here, and we saw Tanyan score last week. Like, I think Detroit's pretty bad across the board running against the run, against the pass. They're going to give up some scores. They may even, Baltimore's defense may create some short fields. I like it. I'll be honest, I didn't have him on my list. Maybe I was an oversight there, but I was really on the Hollywood Brown train because he's got, he was a guy who was so streaky before and was like, you couldn't really, maybe one long touchdown here or there, but this year he's been pretty dependable and they've been looking his way a little more. Bigger, share the targets, and that's kind of where my main focus was. But I'll be honest, maybe if I'm going to go the Baltimore route, I should get some exposure to Andrews too. Speaking of stacks, let's roll right into stacks. I want to run out of time here. They're going to cut us off. We can go as long as we want, Joe.
Yeah, we get to talking, man. We can go for a while.
We can go for a while. Let's do some stacks. So let's.
Okay.
I already talked about Baltimore a little, but I'll circle back to a different game here in a minute. Are you going to kind of go with an obvious one here, or do you have one that maybe isn't so obvious?
Yeah, I think I'm trying not to fall into that Dallas Chargers trap like last week, but just from a game environment perspective, kind of taking a macro view, that Seattle-Minnesota game is really hard to ignore. Very similar total, projected total to what we saw last week. An over and under of 55.5, I believe, right now. You got two offenses offenses that have very explosive pieces, and you got two defenses that are questionable at best, kind of struggling a little bit this year, honestly.
Sure.
And the thing I like really, I love Russ as a player. I think John talked about him a little bit last week when kind of heading up to the Tennessee matchup. And I really like Russ as a player, but as we mentioned for a couple other guys this week, you're almost dependent on that hyper efficiency from Russ,
right,
to put up a tournament winning top score. Unless the opposing team's offense forces him to be aggressive. And I think that's what we could see this week with Minnesota, a very competent offense with a questionable Seattle defense. I think the Vikings could kind of force Russ to be aggressive, force Seattle to let Russ be aggressive. So I think there's a lot of kind of paths that this one has to producing some really nice numbers.
And let's not forget about Kirk Cousins. I know my buddy Kyle Ringstad, who's a huge Vikings fan, would say, he was always tweeting about, everyone thinks Kirk Cousins isn't good, but like all the stats suggest otherwise. I mean, he's 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, 70-some% completion percentage. He's playing well. He's got all kinds of threats. We talked about Osborne earlier. You could go Thielen, you can go Jefferson, you can go Cook. I mean, that offense is loaded. In Seattle, just totally fell apart in that game. They were what? They were up big, and all of a sudden Tennessee comes storming back. Derrick Henry goes nuts. I agree with you. I don't see – and Minnesota's defense was horrible last week too, and Arizona did everything they wanted.
Yeah, I think a lot of people expected Minnesota's D to bounce back this year, and it hasn't to this point. Quite simply, they just not look like the kind of Mike Zimmer defenses of old. So I think it's a great environment. As you mentioned, Minnesota's very explosive on the offensive side of the ball and very concentrated usage, which is another thing that I like to consider when stacking games. And the same can be said for Seattle. I mean, we got 3-4 players on each side of the ball that those offenses are pretty much going to run through. So it's a really great environment to stack a game. My only concern is the popularity that it's going to have.
Well, I have a couple other ones just to throw out there, and then we can wrap things up. I mean, Kyler Murray has been phenomenal. His price is crazy high. Hopkins is getting up there. But like Rondale Moore has been fantastic and is relatively inexpensive. Jacksonville's been horrible on defense. Would you consider, spending up to be contrarian this week with like a Kyler Nook, bringing it back with Marvin Jones Jr., or maybe throwing a Rondale Moore in there for as a cheap piece to is that game that people are going to overlook just because it's not, these top 4 or 5?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting game to point out, Dan. What we see a lot of times is people are scared of the blowout factor.
Right.
And I think outside looking in at this one, you think, well, Arizona's just going to blow these guys out, and Kyler's going to be sitting in the fourth quarter. But really, man, you and I have watched football for a long time.
Yeah.
How often do we see these NFL quarterbacks sitting in the fourth quarter? How often do we see true blowouts? So while that is certainly a possibility, Jacksonville's been bad. You can also kind of take the contrarian view of like you said, hey, this Arizona offense is rolling. I think these guys are going to keep rolling. Maybe run it back with a Jaguar and hope, maybe they get some cheap points at the end. We talked about it a little bit last, kind of the Tampa Bay Atlanta Falcons scenario setting up kind of similar. We expected Tampa Bay to roll, and we're a little bit scared of that game. Well, you would have done pretty well if you stacked the Tampa Bay Bucks last week. So I think that's a good call, Dan. I think it's certainly viable to plug in the Arizona Cardinals in there.
Yeah, no, I'm planning on doing it. I don't know how I'm going to fit them with their prices and still get the other guys I want in, but I think it's really viable. And Jacksonville's going to play catch up, going to get some garbage points. There's one guy I mentioned him earlier in the show, and then we didn't get to him somehow. But what do you think about Derrick Henry? And I want to throw out there Jonathan Taylor. Just both of the backs. That game has a 48-5 total, and it's normally that's kind of high, but except there's 5, 6, 7 games higher this week. I have both of them rated well as far as line matchups. Both teams run the ball well and have not stopped the run all that well. Either of those backs interest you, and maybe just focus on the running games there, since
Yeah.
This has a rookie quarterback, and I don't know.
Yeah, the Wentz the Wentz situation has kind of made me press pause on that game for the moment till we know exactly where Carson Wentz is. Doesn't look good right now, so could probably see Eason in there this week, which would change the dynamic of that game. That would, if Eason gets the start, that's swinging me more towards Derrick Henry, honestly. Because I think Tennessee's likely going to be playing with the lead and willing to just lean on Henry. But man, you talk about one of the most polarizing guys from a DFS perspective. You'll have some guys that will just basically never going to roster him on DraftKings because he doesn't catch enough passes. Yeah. Last week he did, but I mean, last week's a perfect example. You know,
I thought I got away with the Henry fade, and then third quarter they still feed him the ball and they throw him the ball, and Seattle just lets him do that. And all of a sudden he's got 50 points, and you're like, wow, what happened? He had
yeah, man. I mean, people think that he's so game script dependent, but really, when you look at it, man, they will keep feeding him the ball unless they are way down. They will keep giving him the ball, and it's really crazy because he is so explosive. And once he gets going, he's almost unstoppable. You just don't know when that's coming. So he's a very, very scary fade, but he can also be a very scary player to roster because he does kind of have those floor games that we see with him occasionally. So I don't have a strong take on Henry. I think there'll probably be a little bit of recency bias involved this week. I think a lot of people are going to hop on after his monster week, kind of highly publicized. Game log watchers are going to see, that huge point total from last week and click his name. So going to kind of keep an eye out on his ownership. I don't love chalk Derrick Henry, so I'll keep an eye out on it.
You don't love chalk Derrick Henry until he goes for 50 again, and everyone's they're going. I mean, there's
I like the man. I can't believe I missed him last week. It was a perfect setup, like 5 to 7% ownership. That's when you want Derrick Henry in your roster.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's technically not November yet. Once it turns November, December, you have to play Derrick Henry every week.
Yeah.
That's the rule, but it's not yet. But I do think he's intriguing, and he's not terrible. He's only 8,600 on DK, so he's not like 200 more than Cook. Probably have some shares in tournaments, but I don't think you can play him in cash just because of the volatility that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and probably goes without saying, but I always prefer him on FanDuel because of the PPR. That's usually where I'll look to roster him first when possible.
Maybe his receiving was a little fluky there last week and this year. But all right, we're ready for our final segment with some bold predictions. Bold prediction week 2. My prediction last week, I pointed out, was that Tom Brady would throw 5 touchdowns. He didn't hit 350 because he was a little more efficient than that, but he did throw 5 touchdowns. So score one for me. Just had to throw that out there. What is your bold take? Player, total, game, whatever you want. Give us something to finish the show on.
Man, you always get me on these, Dan. Yours are so good. Mine are always terrible. I had Daryl Henderson last week going for 100 plus and 2 TDs. He was on the way. I feel like it was kind of a half a point on that one. As usual, I kind of struggle with these, man. I'm tossing out a guy that we talked about a little earlier at the top of the show. I saw the news today, and I was like, this could happen. I'm going Justin Fields, and the Bears upset the Browns. I think he'll have a solid game. I think he'll play well. So I'm predicting they go into Cleveland and get a win this week.
I like that. I mean, I would also like to see that as a Steelers fan, as Browns are 2-0, or no, Browns are 1-1. They lost week 1. The Steelers let me down last week. And you notice I didn't wear any Steelers stuff this week because you're right. I need to wear the same shirt.
Yeah, you gotta wear the same one, man.
It can't be the different shirt. That was a really immature mistake. Anyways, I'm going to go with a player here for mine, and a guy that I didn't talk about yet, Sterling Shepard for the Giants. I think he is just having a great year, and I feel like everyone was on Galladay coming into this season, but Shepard is a guy who is very affordably priced. He's probably going to be in my cash build, or maybe in some GPPs paired with Jones. And I think he has a 100-yard day and hits the end zone. He's got another touchdown, 100 yards receiving, and that's going to be an awesome value on whatever site you play. So Sterling Shepard over 100 yards and a receiving touchdown, and get him in your cash builds. All right, Joe. And we finished another week. Thanks for coming on. 3 weeks in a row, man. I really can't.
Yeah. Man, no problem, man. I'm always glad to be with you, Dan. I got to take a week off next week, man. I got to get back to golf.
Get back into golf. And listen, good luck with your lineups this week. Good luck to all of our listeners. If you guys have any suggestions about what we should talk about on the show, or if you want to leave any comments here or some of your favorite plays, ask us questions, interact, whatever you want to do. We're happy to answer that stuff, or hit us up on Twitter. And have a great week 3. Thanks for listening. Make sure you check out all the other great content on RotoBaller. We'll see you.